The knock came at 6:47 a.m. Not the polite knock of a neighbor borrowing sugar, not the friendly tap of a delivery driver. This was the knock of authority, sharp, aggressive, demanding immediate compliance. Marcus Wellington stood in his kitchen, coffee mug halfway to his lips, frozen by the sound that shattered the morning silence of Riverside Estates. Through the frosted glass of his front door, he could see shadows, multiple figures, the distinctive silhouette of uniforms. His hand didn't shake as he set down the mug. 43 years of life had taught him that showing fear only fed the beast. He'd learned that lesson young, growing up in neighborhoods where authority meant something different than it did in places like this, these manicured lawns, these pristine sidewalks, these houses that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. He opened the door. 3 HOA board members stood on his porch, flanked by 2 private security guards in quasi-police uniforms. Behind them, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, phones already out, recording. Marcus recognized the choreography instantly. This wasn't spontaneous. This was theater. Patricia Morland stood at the center, the HOA president, her pearl necklace catching the early morning sun like a string of judgments. To her left was Gerald Hutchins, vice president, arms crossed, face set in that particular expression of righteous indignation that Marcus had seen 1,000 times before. And to her right, younger, hungrier, was Derek Stone, the compliance officer who'd been finding violations on Marcus's property since the day he'd moved in 6 months ago. "Mr. Wellington?" Patricia's voice carried across the lawn, loud enough for the phones to catch every word. "We're here to inform you that you have 72 hours to vacate these premises." The morning air seemed to crystallize around that sentence. Marcus sighed, bowed perfectly still, his 6'2" frame filling the doorway, his pressed white shirt crisp despite the early hour. He didn't speak. Not yet, because he'd learned another lesson over 4 decades. Sometimes silence was the most powerful response. "Your violations have been documented." Derek stepped forward, holding a tablet like a weapon. "Unapproved paint color, unauthorized landscaping modifications, failure to submit architectural review requests, and most egregiously—" He paused for effect, glancing at the growing crowd. "Operating a business from your residence in violation of our strict residential use-only covenant." The crowd murmured. Someone gasped. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The business was his home office, the place where he reviewed case files, wrote legal opinions, and conducted the research that had earned him a reputation as one of the most thorough jurists in the state. But they didn't know that. They'd never asked. They'd only seen a black man moving into their exclusive neighborhood, paying cash for a house they probably didn't think he could afford. They'd seen his late-night lights and assumed the worst. They'd heard his voice on conference calls and imagined violations. "You were given multiple warnings," Gerald added, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We pride ourselves on being a fair community, Mr. Wellington. But rules are rules. Riverside Estates has maintained its property values and its character for 23 years by ensuring everyone adheres to the same standards." The same standards. Marcus had heard those words before too, in restaurants that suddenly had no tables available, in stores where security followed 3 steps behind, in courtrooms where public defenders were overwhelmed and prosecutors were overzealous. Always the same standards, applied differently depending on who was being measured. "The board voted unanimously last night," Patricia continued, and there was something in her voice now, something that sounded almost like pleasure. "Your deed violations constitute a breach of contract. Our legal team has prepared the eviction documentation. The county sheriff has been notified." She extended a manila envelope toward him. Marcus didn't take it. Instead, he looked past her at the faces in the crowd. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked eager, some looked away entirely, as if witnessing this scene somehow implicated them in something they didn't want to name. 72 hours, Derek repeated. Security will be monitoring to ensure compliance. The private guards shifted their weight, hands resting meaningfully on their belts, most of them. The words hung in the air like a prophecy nobody understood yet, and in that moment, standing in his doorway with the morning sun warming his back and the cold stares of his neighbors chilling his front, Marcus Wellington made a decision. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who knew something nobody else in this carefully staged production knew. Is that all? His voice was quiet, controlled, each word measured and precise. Patricia blinked, clearly thrown by his calm. Yes. We'll expect you to begin packing immediately. Marcus nodded slowly. I see. And this legal documentation, who prepared it? That's none of your... Who signed off on the eviction order? The board, as I said, but legally, who authorized this eviction? Which court? Something flickered across Patricia's face, uncertainty. The script was deviating. That's all handled by our legal team. You'll find everything you need in the documentation. Marcus finally reached out and took the envelope. He didn't open it. He simply held it, feeling its weight, its presumption, its complete and utter invalidity. 72 hours, he repeated softly. Exactly. Then I suggest you make the... But they would. Oh, they would. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, like moviegoers leaving before the credits finished rolling, sensing they might be missing something but not knowing what. Marcus closed his door and stood in his foyer for exactly 10 seconds, allowing himself that moment of pure, unadulterated anger. Then he walked to his study, sat down at his desk, and opened the manila envelope. The documentation was impressive in its incompetence. Whoever had prepared it clearly had some legal knowledge, enough to make it look official, enough to intimidate someone unfamiliar with actual property law. But to someone who'd spent the last 18 years immersed in jurisprudence, who'd argued before the state Supreme Court, who'd written opinions that were cited in law schools across the country, it was transparently, almost comically, invalid. The eviction order wasn't an eviction order at all. It was a cease and desist notice dressed in aggressive language. The unanimous board vote referenced statutes that didn't exist. The county sheriff notification was, at best, a fabrication, and at worst, impersonation of law enforcement. But the intent was clear. They wanted him scared. They wanted him gone. They wanted Riverside Estates to return to whatever it had been before a man who looked like him had dared to purchase property here. Marcus leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. 6 months ago, when he'd bought this house, he'd known it might cause ripples. The neighborhood was 94% white, affluent, and had a reputation for being selective about new residents. But he'd been tired of apartments, tired of city noise, tired of having neighbors above and below, and on all sides. He'd wanted space, peace, a place to think. He'd wanted what everyone wanted, a home. The violations had started in week 2. His mailbox was 3 inches too far from the curb. His grass was 1/4 inch above the maximum allowed height. His curtains were non-approved colors visible from the street. Each violation came with a fine and each fine came with a lal. So that managed to be both aggressively formal and personally insulting. He'd paid them, not because he agreed, but because he'd been preparing for a major case, a complex fraud trial that demanded all his attention. The HOA violations were gnats, annoying but not worth the energy to swat. Then came the business operation accusation. Someone, he suspected Derek, the compliance officer who seemed to patrol the neighborhood like a medieval guard looking for heretics, had photographed Marcus through his home office window, late at night, sitting at his desk, reading documents, making notes. They'd documented his conference calls, his occasional visitors, the delivery of legal files. And they'd decided he was running an illegal business. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so deliberately malicious. Because Marcus Wellington wasn't running a business from his home, he was a judge. The chief judge of the 14th Circuit Court, to be precise, one of the youngest chief judges in state history, appointed after a career that had taken him from public defender to prosecutor to the bench. A career built on one principle, that justice was supposed to be blind, but too often it just looked the other way. He hadn't advertised his profession to his neighbors, partly for privacy, judges made enemies, and keeping work separate from home life was simple safety, partly because he'd learned over the years that telling people you were a judge changed how they acted around you, and he'd wanted to see how this neighborhood really operated. Now he knew. His phone buzzed, a text from his court administrator. "Morning, Chief. Reminder, HOA case on your docket today. Riverside Estates, HOA versus Thompson. Unauthorized fence dispute, 10 a.m. Marcus read the message twice. Riverside Estates. His HOA was appearing in his courtroom today, in a case about property violations and compliance enforcement, represented by their legal team, arguing for their authority to fine, sanction, and control residents who violated their covenants. He checked the case file on his laptop. The plaintiff's attorney was Richard Bordeaux, expensive, aggressive, known for representing HOAs in heavy-handed enforcement actions. The defendant was an elderly black woman named Constance Thompson who'd put up a fence to keep her grandchildren safe and was now being fined $500 per day until she removed it. The hearing was in 3 hours. Marcus stood and walked to his closet. His judicial robe hung there, pressed and ready. Black fabric, simple design, but carrying the weight of authority that transcended any HOA board, any private security guard, any threatening letter delivered at dawn. He made coffee. He reviewed his notes. He did everything he did every morning before court. Except this morning, he also drafted a response to his eviction notice, not as a frightened homeowner, as a judge who understood exactly how far these people had overstepped. At 9:15 a.m. he left his house. Several neighbors watched from their windows as he backed out of his driveway in his modest sedan. He saw curtains twitch, saw phones rise, saw the neighborhood watch network activating. Let them watch. They'd see him leave and assume he was packing, assume he was defeated, assume he was another problem solved. At 9:47 a.m., Marcus Wellington walked through the employee entrance of the district courthouse, greeted the security guards by name, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and entered his chambers. His clerk, Jennifer, looked up from her desk. "Morning, Chief. The HOA case is first up. Both parties are here. Bordeaux looks hungry. I think he smells an easy win." Marcus hung his coat. Does he now? The defendant showed up without an attorney. Just her and some handwritten notes. Bordeaux's team has 3 lawyers and a PowerPoint presentation. Of course they do. Jennifer paused. "You okay, Chief? You seem different today." Marcus looked at his clerk, this young woman who'd worked with him for 3 years, who'd seen him rule on cases involving millions of dollars, life sentences, constitutional questions that would echo for generations, who'd never seen him angry. "I'm perfect, Jennifer, absolutely perfect." He put on his robe. At 9:58 a.m., he reviewed the courtroom assignment, Judge Marcus Wellington presiding. Then finally he looked up. At the table to his left sat Constance Thompson, 73 years old, Riverside Estates, HOA vs. Thompson, compliance enforcement hearing. At 10:12 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang through the courtroom. "All rise, the 14th Circuit Court is now in session, the Honourable Chief Judge Marcus Wellington presiding." And Marcus walked through the door from his chambers into the courtroom, ascending to the bench. He didn't look at the plaintiff's table immediately. He sat, he arranged his papers, he took his time, wearing her Sunday best, hands folded nervously over her handwritten notes. At the table to his right sat Richard Bordeaux and his team of attorneys, laptops open, documents organized, confidence radiating. And behind them, in the gallery, sitting in the front row to support their legal team's latest enforcement action, sat Patricia Morland, Gerald Hutchins, and Derek Stone, the HOA board of Riverside Estates. His HOA board, who'd served him an eviction notice 4 hours ago. Marcus watched the recognition hit them in waves. First confusion. Why did that judge look familiar? Then disbelief. No, it couldn't be. Then horror. Oh, God. Patricia's, necklace suddenly looked less like jewelry and more like a noose. Midpoint twist, £900 or 100 words. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of Patricia Morland's sharp intake of breath. Marcus let the moment stretch, let them sit in it, let them feel what it was like to suddenly realize the power dynamic had shifted so completely that the ground beneath them might as well have opened up. "Counsel," he said, his voice measured and professional, "please state your appearances for the record." Richard Bordeaux stood, but his usual swagger had evaporated. "Richard Bordeaux, Your Honor, representing Riverside Estates Homeowners Association." The attorney's eyes kept flicking from Marcus's face to the papers in front of him, as if trying to reconcile the man on the bench with the man he'd never met, but whose eviction his clients had just attempted.
"Ms. Thompson," Marcus turned to the elderly woman, "I see you're representing yourself today." "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was soft but steady. "Couldn't afford a lawyer, but I wrote down everything I wanted to say." "The court appreciates your preparation. Before we begin, I need to address a potential conflict of interest." Marcus's gaze moved to the gallery, settling on the 3 board members who were now visibly sweating despite the cool air. "I'm going to state some facts for the record, and I expect complete honesty in response. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Bordeaux managed. "I am a resident of Riverside Estates. I purchased property at 847 Maple Drive 6 months ago. The plaintiff in this case is the HOA that governs my property. The board members of that HOA are present in this courtroom." He paused. "Miss Morland, Mr. Hutchins, Mr. Stone, please stand." They stood like students called to the principal's office, faces ranging from red to pale. "For the record, did the 3 of you, this morning at approximately 6:47 a.m., appear at my residence?" Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your Honor, we didn't know." "Yes or no, Ms. Morland?" "Yes." "Did you present me with documentation claiming to be an eviction order?" Gerald found his voice. "Your Honor, this is highly unusual." "Answer the question, Mr. Hutchins." Yes, but we were acting on behalf of the community, following proper procedures.
We'll discuss the propriety of your procedures in a moment. Mr. Bordeaux, did you or your firm prepare the eviction documentation delivered to my residence this morning? The attorney's face had gone through several colours and settled on grey. Your Honour, I need to consult with my clients. That's not an answer. Did your firm prepare the documentation? A pause. No, Your Honour, our firm handles general HOA representation, but we were not involved in any eviction proceedings against you. Marcus nodded slowly. Interesting. So the documentation was prepared by the board themselves or by someone acting on their instruction outside of your firm's oversight? It wasn't a question. Derek Stone, who'd been silent until now, suddenly spoke. Your Honour, we have every right to enforce our covenants. Mr. Stone, you will not speak unless I ask you a direct question. The only reason you're not in contempt right now is because I want this on the record. Marcus's voice never rose, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. Here's what's going to happen. This court has a case before it, Ms. Thompson's case, and that case will be heard on its merits. My residence in Riverside Estates does not create a conflict because I have no personal interest in the outcome of Ms. Thompson's fence dispute. However, the behaviour of the plaintiff's board members this morning does raise serious questions about their judgment and their understanding of both property law and their actual authority. He turned to Constance Thompson. Ms. Thompson, please tell me about your fence. The elderly woman stood, holding her notes. Your Honour, my daughter died 2 years ago, car accident. Left me with her 3 children, ages 4, 6 and 8. They're good kids, but they're kids. They need to play. I got a small backyard and it backs up to a retention pond. I worried every day they'd wander to that water. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. So I saved up and put in a fence, 4 feet high, white vinyl, professionally installed. Cost me $3,000 I didn't really have, but the day it went up, I could breathe again. I could let them play without standing there every second, watching. When did the HOA first contact you about it? Week later. Said I didn't get pre-approval. Said the fence violated the aesthetic guidelines. They wanted me to take it down or pay $500 a day until I did. Your Honour, I'm on Social Security. I'm raising 3 kids on that and my late daughter's life insurance. $500 a day. In 2 weeks, that fine is more than I paid for the fence. In a month, it's more than my house payment. Did you attempt to get approval after the fact? Yes, sir. I went to the board meeting, brought pictures of the fence, explained about my grandkids and the pond. They voted no, said rules are rules. She looked at Patricia, Gerald, and Derek. Didn't matter that old Mr. Henderson has a fence twice as high. Didn't matter that the Johnsons added a gazebo without asking. Just mattered that I broke the rules. Marcus made notes. Mr. Bordeaux, what's your legal basis for the $500 daily fine? The attorney stood. Your Honour, the CCRs clearly state that any external modification requires Architectural Review Committee approval. Ms. Thompson failed to seek approval. The fine schedule is established in the bylaws. Show me where a 4-foot safety fence around a property backing to a hazard would reasonably be denied. The HOA has broad discretion. Discretion isn't unlimited, counsel. It's bound by reasonableness and the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. A fence protecting young children from a documented hazard would seem to fall under reasonable safety modifications. Bordeaux shuffled papers. He was a skilled attorney, but he was also reading the room. This wasn't going the way his clients expected. Marcus turned back to the board members. Ms. Morland, how many architectural approval requests has the board denied in the past 2 years? Patricia looked to Bordeaux, who couldn't help her here. I'd have to check the records. An estimate. Maybe 10? And how many of those denials involved residents who were, He paused. Let's say, newer to the community. The silence was deafening. Your Honor? Derek Stone couldn't help himself. We don't keep statistics based on whatever you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Stone. I'm asking factual questions, but your defensiveness is noted. Marcus leaned back. Here's what I see. I see an HOA that selectively enforces its covenants. I see a board that uses compliance violations as a weapon against residents they deem undesirable. I see people who've confused property management with personal power. He looked at Constance Thompson. Ms. Thompson, your fence stays up. The fines are vacated. Furthermore, this court finds that the fence was a reasonable safety modification that should have been approved upon request. The HOA is ordered to formally approve the fence retroactively. Constance's hand went to her mouth. Your Honor, you're protecting your grandchildren. That's not just your right. It's your responsibility. He turned to Bordeaux. Mr. Bordeaux, I suggest you counsel your clients about the difference between covenants and constitutional authority. They seem confused. Then his gaze settled on Patricia, Gerald, and Derek. As for the matter of my eviction, let's be very clear. The courtroom seemed to contract, all space and air, focusing on the bench where Marcus sat in his robe, the symbol of actual authority, facing down three people who'd mistaken bureaucracy for power. The documentation delivered to my residence this morning, Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that could cut stone, is not an eviction order. It's not a legal notice. It's not even a properly formatted demand letter. What it is an attempt to intimidate a resident through the appearance of legal authority you don't possess. Patricia started to speak, but Marcus raised one hand. I'm not finished. An HOA has authority, limited, specific authority, granted by covenant and state statute. You can fine for legitimate violations. You can place liens for unpaid fines following proper notice and hearing procedures. What you cannot do is evict a property owner. That power belongs to courts, to judges, to people who've studied law, who've been appointed or elected, who understand that with authority comes accountability. He picked up the manila envelope from his desk. This document references statutes that don't exist. It threatens involvement of the county sheriff without having contacted them, which, by the way, could constitute impersonation of law enforcement. It demands I vacate property I own outright, with no mortgage, no liens, no legal basis for removal. Derek Stone's face had gone from confident to ashen. Your Honor, we were advised. By whom? Silence. I'll tell you what I think happened. I think you three decided that a black man moving into your exclusive neighborhood was unacceptable. I think you started looking for violations before my moving boxes were unpacked. I think when I didn't respond the way you wanted, when I didn't get angry, didn't fight back, didn't give you justification for escalation, you got desperate, so you manufactured a crisis, a business operation, an eviction, theater designed to humiliate me in front of my neighbors and force me out. That's not... Patricia's voice cracked. Your Honor, we treat everyone the same. Do you? Let's examine that. Jennifer, Marcus addressed his clerk, who was taking notes. Please retrieve the compliance violation records for Riverside Estates for the past 6 months. Already pulled them, Your Honor, Jennifer said, a small smile playing at her lips. Thought you might ask. How many violation notices were issued to my property in 6 months? 23. A murmur ran through the courtroom. And how many were issued to all other properties combined in the same period? 18. Marcus looked at the board. I've received more violation notices than the rest of the neighborhood combined. Would you say that's proportional enforcement, Ms. Morland? Patricia's pearls seemed tighter around her neck. Some properties require more oversight. Mine required more oversight because you were looking for reasons to harass me. Let's see, my mailbox was 3 inches off standard. The curtains visible from my living room window were burgundy instead of the approved beige, white, or cream. My grass was measured at 1 1/4 inches when the maximum is 1 inch. Do you inspect everyone's grass with a ruler or just mine? No answer. The business operation accusation is particularly interesting. Mr. Stone, you photographed me through my home office window at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. You documented my conference calls. You noted delivery of documents. What exactly did you think I was doing? Derek's voice was barely a whisper. We assumed it was some kind of... We didn't know you were a judge. And if I had been running a business, a consulting firm, a freelance operation, working from home is legal, Mr. Stone. Millions of people do it. But you didn't care about legality. You cared about finding a reason. Marcus stood, and even though he wasn't a particularly tall man, he seemed to tower from the bench. Here's what's going to happen. The eviction notice against me is void and will be treated as such. The fines levied against my property, all 23 violations, are vacated. You will cease surveillance of my residence, you will cease selective enforcement, and you will issue a written apology to both myself and Miss Thompson. Your Honour, Bordeaux stood, seeing his client's case collapsing. With all respect, this court's jurisdiction... Counsel, be very careful about your next words. This court's jurisdiction is clear in Miss Thompson's case. As for my personal matter, I'm not ruling from the bench. I'm informing 3 individuals who attempted to illegally evict a property owner what the consequences of their actions could be. If they refuse, I welcome them to continue their efforts, at which point I'll respond not as a judge, but as a property owner whose civil rights have been violated. I suspect the State Attorney General would be very interested in an HOA that engages in selective enforcement based on race. The word hung in the air, finally spoken aloud. Patricia was crying now, mascara running. We're not racist. Then prove it. Change your behaviour. Review every enforcement action with actual equity. Ask yourselves why you see violations in some properties and not others. Ask yourselves if you're measuring grass with a ruler or measuring people with bias. Marcus sat again. This hearing is adjourned. Ms. Thompson, you're free to go. Your fence is approved, board members. You have 30 days to comply with this court's orders regarding selective enforcement and written apologies. Failure to comply will result in sanctions. The gavel fell, but Marcus wasn't done. One more thing, Mr. Stone. You mentioned you didn't know I was a judge. That's interesting, because I've been chief judge of this circuit for 18 months. My appointment was in every local newspaper. My photograph is on the court website. The fact that you didn't know tells me you never looked beyond what you assumed about me. You saw my face and stopped seeing anything else. Derek couldn't meet his eyes. Learn from that. Marcus gathered his papers and stood. This court is in recess. He walked back to his chambers, the robe flowing behind him, and didn't look back at the stunned silence he left in his wake. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in his backyard watching the sun set over Riverside Estates. The evening was cool, the sky painted in oranges and purples, and for the first time since moving in, the neighborhood felt quiet in a peaceful way rather than a hostile one. A formal apology letter had arrived from the HOA board, stilted and clearly written by an attorney, but present nonetheless. The violation notices had stopped. The surveillance had ceased. Patricia Morland had resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons. Gerald and Derek remained, but they'd voted to overhaul the enforcement procedures, establishing an oversight committee and mandatory bias training for board members. Small steps, but steps. More interestingly, other things had changed too. Constance Thompson's grandchildren played in their fenced yard every evening now, their laughter carrying across the retention pond. Two other families, both minorities who'd been dealing with their own harassment, had come forward with complaints, and the new oversight committee was reviewing their cases. And Marcus's neighbours, the ones who'd watched his eviction with phones recording, had started doing something unexpected. They'd started talking to him. Not all of them. Some still crossed the street when they saw him. Some still avoided eye contact. But Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down had brought over homemade dumplings. The Ramirez family had invited him to their son's graduation party. Young Tim Henderson, probably 8 years old, had asked if Marcus wanted to play basketball in his driveway. Small connections, small moments of humanity breaking through the walls of assumption. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. HOA case settled. Johnson family. Gazebo dispute. Board. Approved it retroactively without going to court. Progress? He smiled and typed back. Progress. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his entire career fighting for justice in courtrooms, writing opinions about equal protection and due process and the fundamental dignity that every person deserved under the law. But it had taken a manila envelope and a fake eviction notice to teach him something new. Sometimes justice didn't happen in sweeping appellate decisions or constitutional rulings. Sometimes it happened in neighborhoods, in HOA meetings, in the small daily choices people made about who deserved respect and who deserved scrutiny. He thought about Patricia Morland, crying in his courtroom. He didn't take joy in that. He took no pleasure in anyone's humiliation. But he hoped, genuinely hoped, that in that moment of recognition, when the power she'd wielded so carelessly had evaporated in the face of actual authority, she'd learned something. That power without accountability was tyranny, that rules without fairness were oppression, that treating people differently based on who they were rather than what they'd done was the oldest, ugliest story in human history. And that every person, every single person, deserved to come home to a place where they felt safe. Marcus looked at his house, his sanctuary, his home. They'd tried to take it, failed spectacularly. And in failing, they'd revealed something about themselves that couldn't be hidden anymore. But they'd also revealed something else. That change was possible. Painful, uncomfortable, forced change, but change nonetheless. His doorbell rang. Marcus walked through his house and opened the front door. Derek Stone stood there, no longer in his unofficial compliance officer capacity, just a man in jeans and a button-down shirt. Judge Wellington, he said quietly, I know I have no right to ask, but I wanted to say I'm sorry, not the legal apology, a real one. I was wrong about everything. Marcus studied the younger man's face, saw genuine remorse there. Or maybe just genuine fear of consequences, hard to tell sometimes. Mr. Stone, Marcus said carefully, apologies are important, but behavior is what matters. Show me you've learned something. Vote fairly. Enforce rules equally. See people as people, not as problems to be solved. Derek nodded. I will. I am. I'm trying. Then that's enough, for now. They shook hands and Derek left. Marcus closed his door and returned to his study. Case files waited. Legal opinions demanded writing. Justice Rexultium Wicket required constant attention, constant vigilance, constant work. But tonight, just for tonight, he allowed himself to feel something that had eluded him for 6 months in this house. Peace. Because home wasn't just a building, it wasn't just property, it was the one place in the world where you were supposed to be safe from judgment, from persecution, from people who decided you didn't belong before they ever knew your name. And nobody, not an HOA board, not private security, not all the pearls and policies and prejudices in the world, had the authority to take that away. The gavel had fallen. Justice this time had been served.